Throughout the evening, I noticed two men lingering in a booth, one occasionally venturing to other tables while the other nursed his drink. Typically, he approached tables occupied by women, engaging in brief conversations that sometimes ended abruptly, while at other times producing an envelope containing documents or photographs. The contents are unclear to me. I assumed they were in sales and was surprised that management had not intervened. Later that night, I mentioned this observation to my companions, my 2-year-old wife Christy, our friends Chris and his wife Liz, and Heinz and his wife Kim. We briefly speculated on their activities before moving on. Approximately 30 minutes later, the first man approached our table. I assumed he had exhausted his options with tables primarily occupied by women, and we were about to discover what was going on. He greeted us and asked how we were doing tonight. His tone is friendly. Our responses were muddled, and he smiled at each of us before going on to explain that his friend, who was in town for the weekend on business, was looking for company. He wanted to see if any of the ladies would be interested. I was taken aback by his audacity in approaching a table where each woman was clearly accompanied by her partner and asking if they'd be interested in joining his friend for lovemaking. I was about to say something when Liz interrupted, questioning his proposition. The man responded, stating that his friend was well endowed and knew how to use it. "I'm suggesting that one of us try it." At this point, the women could barely hold back. Laughter. But he seemed unconcerned. Perhaps the repeated rejection had made him immune. Kim took the next step, most likely initiating the events that followed. And how do we know he's actually that well equipped? The man retrieved the familiar envelope he had been carrying all evening, revealing several photos of his friend that confirmed his claim. At this point, the men among us were happy to let the women handle the situation, eagerly anticipating the moment when this person would be sent away. The women, clearly impressed by the images, reacted with exaggerated enthusiasm. While Chris, Heinz, and I were amused by their antics, the big proposition arrived. "So, ladies, what do you say? Are there any takers? You will come to regret it." Liz and Kim shook their heads, giggling as they returned the pictures to the man, who restowed them in the envelope. It appeared that he was about to leave and try his luck elsewhere. When he paused and focused on Christy, he may have noticed something familiar in her eyes, prompting him to ask her again. "How about you, little lady? I didn't see you shaking your head." I sat there confidently, but in retrospect, foolishly waiting for Christy to confront the guy. When she finally spoke, I was more interested in his response than in her words. To my surprise, he did not frown or remain calm. Instead, he smiled broadly and walked over to Christy. It took me a moment to register her and say, "I'm going." By the time I regained my composure, he had already removed her from the table and was leading her out. I couldn't tell if there was a signal or if the second guy just understood, but he was already heading for the door. Our friend appeared as shocked as I was, and I tried to say something to Christy, but nothing came out. Despite my shock, I managed to intervene, grabbing Christy's arm and pulling her away from him before they reached the door. I questioned the bouncer's actions, wondering what he was doing, but then a massive hand attached to the largest arm I had ever seen grabbed mine, forcing me to let Christy go. I protested, telling him Christy was my wife and that I was simply trying to keep her from leaving with those guys. Despite my protests, the bouncer maintained his grip and asserted his authority over the situation. He expressed regret for whatever had happened in my marriage, but emphasized his responsibility to prevent violence, according to him. Christy claimed she was leaving with them willingly, so he couldn't let me touch her like that on their property, even though he was holding me. Christy whispered something into his ear, causing him to give her a strange look before returning his gaze to me and then back to her. He asked if she was certain about her decision. Christy returned my gaze and appeared to regain her composure, confidently affirming her decision to the bouncer. After Christy walked towards the waiting men by the door, I desperately called for her to stop and return, but she did not hesitate. I could only watch as she joined the two men and went out the door. I assumed the bouncer would release me once they were gone, allowing me to pursue them. However, when I attempted to pull away after the door had closed, I found myself still firmly restrained. I protested, asking why he was still holding me when they had left the property. I struggled with him, but it was futile. Finally, I paused and looked at him with resignation, apologizing for the situation. He explained that Christy had asked him to hold me for a few more minutes so I couldn't follow them, and that the parking lot was still technically their property. The realization that Christy had voluntarily left with the two men and asked the bouncer to restrain me sapped all of my fighting spirit. Our friends stood nearby, still shocked by the turn of events. After a few minutes, the bouncer released my arm, and I collapsed to the floor, defeated. I caught a look of sympathy on the bouncer's face before he walked away. The bar had gone silent during the ordeal, and as the drama ended, peripheral conversations resumed. I sat on the floor, devastated, with tears streaming down my cheeks. How could she accomplish this? Was I not enough for her? The painful realization gave me something concrete to act on. Chris and Hines helped me stand and led me back to our table, where Kim and Liz tried to console me after Christy's abandonment and humiliation. However, when I noticed Christy's empty seat, I became determined. I left $1.40 on the table and went to the door. Kim asked if I was leaving. I explained that there was no reason for me to stay and that I had other things to do. Liz inquired about waiting for Christy's return, but I dismissed the idea, recommending that one of them offer her shelter for the night instead. I felt compelled to leave. As I walked away, I overheard the girls asking the guys to intervene, but they refused, saying, "No way, not after what she'd done." I concentrated on the door to avoid the pity of everyone in the bar. I got to my car before being overcome by emotions again, feeling dizzy and on the verge of passing out. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes until I felt good enough to drive home. As I sat there, I thought about how ironic it was that Christy's impulsive nature had drawn me to her in the first place. Christy's phone number appeared on my caller ID about halfway back to our apartment, leading me to believe she had changed her mind and needed assistance. I answered the phone without greeting and went right to offering assistance. Unfortunately, I was mistaken. I asked where Christy was and offered to come get her, requesting the hotel and room number. Sensing she didn't want me to go into the room, I changed my strategy, suggesting she flee and I would pick her up outside. She explained that she was not leaving and intended to stay, calling me baby and hoping I understand. She emphasized that it wasn't about me or her feelings for me, but something she needed to do. I begged her to reconsider, but she insisted she had to go ahead with it, promising it would not harm us. And it was only once. At this point, I felt numb. Not only had she walked out on me in front of our friends and an entire bar, but she had the audacity to call me and ask if I was fine with it. I could not believe how she was treating me. I realized there was nothing to fight for. So I told her I understood. I meant it very differently than she thought. She expressed excitement and thanked me. She promised to show me how much she loved me, once she had finished that. The call ended, and all of my sadness and depression dissipated. I had blocked out the love I felt for her just a few hours before, replacing it with a grim determination to move on. When I got to my apartment, I unpacked my luggage. We each had our own set from before we got married, so I spread all 3 suitcases out on the bed. We didn't have much stuff, and I had far less than Christy did. I thought it would all fit in these 3 cases, but if not, I was confident that whatever I needed to leave behind would not be missed. I took my time. I had no intention of just disappearing. In fact, I was hoping she'd be in as much pain when I walked out the apartment door as she was when she left the bar, and she would have to be present for me to experience that. I had 2 suitcases full and was halfway through the last one when I heard the front door open and then quietly close. I suppose she saw the lights were on and knew I was awake, so she called out to me. I told her to have a good time, but her response sounded like she had just returned from a party, indicating that my sarcasm was not clear. She entered the bedroom and I stole a look at her. Her hair and makeup were disheveled and her clothes appeared rumpled. She appeared content, but her smile quickly faded when she saw me packing. She asked what I was doing and I explained that I was moving out and filing for divorce. She approached me and attempted to stop my packing, but I firmly removed her hand from the suitcase. I'm feeling a surge of rage, similar to how the bouncer gripped my arm. I told her not to touch me and explained that what I understood was that she was going to have fun with those guys regardless of how I felt. I asked if she had been with both men, not just Mr. Big, which revealed my sarcasm. She begged me not to leave, explaining how she had always wanted to try someone that big and had never been with a well-endowed man before. She justified her actions by claiming that it would not have been fair to abandon Desmond after he had done the majority of the work, and she would not want him to exploit married women. She assured me it was over and that she would do anything to make it up to me. I expressed my disappointment to Christy, reminding her that when we married, she promised to be mine forever. I questioned the significance of her promise now that she had broken it once. I questioned how she could possibly make amends for what she had done and expressed my feelings of inadequacy. Despite this, I told her I'd consider putting it behind us if she told me which hotel and room number they took her to. Christy refused to tell me and kept packing. She declined my request, telling me to take a printout of her apology and shove it. She was concerned that if she told me where they were, I would do something dangerous and be hurt. Because there were two of them, she insisted they weren't worth getting into trouble over. I countered, claiming that it was my decision, not hers. I asked her once more for the hotel and room number. She apologized again, citing her promise to protect me once we married. She refused to let me be hurt unless I did the hurting. My response seemed to strike a chord with her, and she eventually agreed. Christy kept trying to persuade me to stay with her while I finished packing, but she no longer physically stopped me. Despite her efforts to reassure me that it was simply lovemaking and something she had to do, she claimed she only loved me. I remained firm in my decision to leave. When she finally spoke, it meant nothing. I'd reached my limit. I told her clearly that it meant something to me. Our lovemaking life was extremely valuable to me. I hadn't realized how little it meant to you, but it was one of the things that made you unique. I was the only one who had the opportunity to experience your body, and you simply gave it away. You did it in the most humiliating way possible. We were out with our best friends, for goodness sake. She apologized, admitting that she was aware of the situation and promising that it would not happen again. Explaining that she had gone a little crazy, but that it was now out of her system, I wondered what else there could be, what she meant by that, and what else she could try. One day I expressed my disbelief and shame over what she had done, recounting how the entire bar looked at me with pity and shame as she walked away without looking back. She cried openly, pleading with me not to abandon her and professing her love for me. I replied firmly, stating that if that was how she expressed love, I was not interested. I admitted that even if she had told me where they were, I would not stay. I told her that while I might forgive her someday, I would never forget what she did and how it made me feel. It took 2 trips, but I eventually loaded my suitcases into my car and drove away. When I returned the second time, Christy was still lying on the floor. All she could do was look up at me as I walked in and mumble, "Please, please don't leave, baby." Regardless of what had happened or what she had done, I felt like an absolute idiot. Leaving like this did not cause me to reconsider, but I did feel bad. I assumed it was because, while I couldn't be with her, I still loved her. I was disoriented when I awoke in the hotel. I had been more tired than I realized. I suppose the adrenaline wore off, and once it happened, I crashed hard. It was almost noon when I awoke. Fortunately, I had paid 2 days in advance, but I was aware of our situation. The bank account couldn't sustain a hotel stay for long. I needed someplace to stay. One issue was that Christy and I had only 3 months left on our lease for our shared apartment. There wasn't enough money to pay for that in a new apartment, so I'd have to decide whether to take the hit and leave the apartment or come up with another plan. Christy and I had very few assets. We each had a car and associated payments, so it was most likely a wash. The bank account was small, and all we had was the furniture we'd purchased, which I didn't particularly like. I didn't hate it. I honestly didn't care. I hated putting any of the other couples in the middle of things. But Chris and Hines had been my best friends for years, long before any of us got married. Chris and Liz had been married 5 years. Hines and Kim have been together nearly 4 years. Christy and I had been the last people to join that particular club. I finally turned my phone back on. I discovered numerous messages from Christy, as well as several messages from the guys and their wives, all of which urged me not to make any rash decisions. One message from Chris stood out, offering assistance in any way they could. I called and got Liz on the phone, asking for marital sanctuary. Liz proposed a deal. I could stay in their guest room for a while, but she would not keep me from Christy. She mentioned how Christy had been asking everyone if they had heard from me. Liz insisted that I be civil with Christy, admitting that she had made a mistake, but emphasizing that it was not as serious as homicide. I accepted Liz's terms and spent the next morning moving from the hotel to their spare room. My boss let me take the morning off, but I had to work late one evening that week to compensate. I decided to work late that night to distract myself from the weekend's activities. I arrived at Chris and Liz's house around 10 o'clock, hoping to get some rest. But I was met with an unexpected encounter with Christy. I questioned her presence, reminding her that I did not want to see her after I left. She apologized, explaining that she was hurting without me and expressing a desire to talk and resolve things. I reiterated that I was not interested in reconciling, but she pleaded with me not to end things over one mistake. She professed our love and begged for the opportunity to make things right. I reminded her that she had the opportunity to save my dignity by telling me where those guys were, but she refused. I told her I needed space to process my emotions. She begged me not to give up on our future and admitted her mistake. I emphasized the gravity of her actions and asked her to leave so that I could process. Christy departed with a lowered head, following a brief conversation with Liz in the kitchen. I remained in the living room as they spoke. Christy then left, pausing briefly at the door to say she loved me before leaving. My resolve weakened, and I sank onto the couch. Liz sat beside me, and Chris stood in the hallway. Liz complimented me on how I handled the situation and thanked me for being so kind. Recognizing that it was not easy, I expressed my dissatisfaction, believing that I did not deserve what had happened. Liz agreed, stating that I should not have to suffer like this, even though Christy was at fault. She mentioned that Christy was also suffering because she didn't expect me to abandon her over this. I inquired whether Christy had planned this, given how much she could get away with. Liz clarified that Christy considered it after the fact. I asked what Christy had told her. Liz explained that Christy had cited the temptation of being with someone wealthy as the motivation for her actions. She assured me that Christy had not intended for me to be held back by the bouncer. This revelation infuriated me. Was the lovemaking at least terrible? Do you want me to sugarcoat it or be honest? I suppose that answers the question. Never mind. But Henry, as satisfying as she claims it was, she refuses to trade what you two have for that. It was only one time, and it meant nothing to her compared to her relationship with you. But she did trade me for that. She had no idea that was what she was doing. We all make choices, and when we do, we choose the consequences, even if we didn't expect them. You're correct. But after reflecting on her actions, she remained optimistic that you two could overcome it. She figured if she handled it casually, you'd eventually forgive her. Kim, I hope so too. But Chris and Hines disagreed. I guess they were correct. Liz, they know me well. I can't see any way out of this. She was deliberate in her interactions, leaving right in front of me and restraining me so she could escape. Then she called me to ask for my approval. She had numerous opportunities to notice that I wasn't okay with this, and she always chose against me. I understand it may appear that way, but she was not thinking clearly. It felt like a moment of temporary insanity. Haven't you ever done something similar and lost sight of the consequences? Liz, I appreciate you advocating for her. I understand you two have become close friends, and I wouldn't expect anything less. You're also my friend, Henry. I understand how much you care about her. Nonetheless, this isn't like when I stayed up all night playing video games instead of writing a history essay. We're adults, and it's clear that her actions would result in the outcome we're experiencing now. You are correct. But my heart tells me you two are wonderful together, and that if you forgive her, you will be happy. Maybe you're correct, Liz. But more likely, I'd be worried about what might happen next. I'd be hesitant to visit a club again, fearing a repeat incident, if she cannot control her impulses. Is it my responsibility to accept that she made her decision and that I must now prioritize my own well-being? Excuse me. I'm tired and need to sleep. Christy's story continues along a predictable path. I will acknowledge her efforts to reconcile, but I am still too resistant. It was difficult because I still loved her. When you divorce, you do not simply lose your spouse. You lose all of your shared dreams, plans, and hopes. We talked about children, grandchildren, travel, and starting a family. Those aspirations had been dashed. It was at these times that the desire to stay together was strongest. Christy and I were in sync about our dreams, as if we were two halves of a whole. However, I could not ignore her actions. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Christy asked for one final conversation. I agreed to listen unconditionally. Following the hearing, Christy and I met in a private room where she apologized. She apologized for her actions, emphasizing that they did not reflect her love for me. She apologized again, saying she'd regret it for the rest of her life. I responded by expressing my own regret, saying I regretted meeting her, proposing to her, and marrying her. I informed her that I was moving on. Christy accepted my decision, expressing her contempt for me and wishing that I would use my brain to make decisions rather than acting on impulse. I was choked up but remained silent. I regret the situation more than my decisions. I left the room and we never spoke or touched again. It felt liberating. It took 3 months before I started going out again. I didn't intend to meet anyone, but I was tired of staying at home. I went out with Chris Hines, Liz, and Kim. They frequently introduced me to friends, hinting at matchmaking. While I wasn't ready for a committed relationship, I did enjoy socializing. I let myself have carefree fun without attachment. They all seemed nice, but there was no spark. And as the night passed, so did our interactions. I also developed a habit of going out alone, finding comfort in solitude. The club was busy, but none of them were my responsibility, which I enjoyed. Tasha was a bartender at the same club where my life changed dramatically. A woman I attended high school with. She had been working there for quite some time, but she was not present that night. Do you remember that night? We were barely acquaintances before, but on the nights I arrived alone, we began to form what appeared to be a friendship. She hinted that she wanted more. About 10 months after Christy left the bar with those guys, I ran into them again. They were back at the club, most likely planning to repeat their scheme. They were simply sitting, drinking, and scanning the room, most likely looking for targets. I assumed Tasha noticed me looking in their direction and inquired about my interests. "Why are you staring at Desmond and Richard?" she asked, piqued my interest. I was surprised she knew their names. I turned back to face her. She confirmed that they were regular customers at the bar. I asked if she was acquainted with them. She responded by saying she wasn't personally. When I mentioned it, I assumed they were from out of town and came in frequently for business. She corrected me, saying they worked in a downtown supply warehouse near the freeway. I asked if they lived nearby, and she confirmed that they had for years. Though she couldn't pinpoint the exact location, she did say that they frequently came to the bar to pick up women and were successful. When she mentioned Richard's good looks, I was surprised to learn that the bar was a popular pickup spot. Surprising, but she seemed unconcerned about my thoughts. I inquired whether the bar had a large number of single women. Tasha responded that they did okay, mostly in groups. However, the guys did not limit themselves to single women. They seemed to prefer married individuals. I tried not to be angry about this revelation while expressing my concern. I mentioned that it sounded risky. Tasha reassured me, saying she doubted the husbands ever found out because the men were not the bragging type, and the wives were usually quiet about it. She didn't seem concerned about the situation, seeing no harm in it. She reasoned that wives got to have fun while husbands remained unaware. So it did not harm them. She proposed that husbands may benefit from the situation by receiving good guilt lovemaking. As I reflected on her words, I realized that nothing would happen between us if she was okay with others engaging in such behavior. She probably wouldn't hesitate to do it herself, which is unfortunate. Tasha continued talking when I didn't respond, mentioning an incident in which the guys attempted to pick up a woman while her husband was at the club. They hadn't tried it again because it had escalated into a major problem and nearly turned violent. She explained that the wife had even asked Victor to restrain her husband so she could leave with the guys. I slowly turned back to her, and she seemed to notice the expression on my face. She confirmed that Christy had an affair. Suddenly, she appeared to put the pieces together, expressing her surprise and apology. When she realized the situation, she seemed at a loss for words. I got up from the bar and went outside, feeling compelled to distance myself from the conversation. As I did so, I made a quick phone call to get things started, then settled outside to wait. I had no idea how much I craved revenge until I discovered it was all a scam. Sure, Christy gladly accepted their invitation, and that will not change, but I believe she did so under the impression that they were just two out-of-towners looking for a fling, never to be seen again. To make it less wrong, I had singled out their car in the parking lot, not to fall into a stereotype, but when I saw the Cadillac with lowered suspension and flashy chrome rims, I was fairly certain it was theirs, as they hadn't begun their search yet. I figured I had time before they arrived, unless they struck lucky early. I was not privy to what happened inside the club, but it took nearly an hour before they emerged, accompanied by a woman they had clearly charmed inside. I'd guessed correctly about the car, so I leaned against the driver's side door as they approached. Desmond, the apparent spokesman, spoke up. "Do you mind taking your hands off my ride?" I ignored him and addressed their slightly intoxicated companion, as much as she might deserve the consequences. I did not want to see a woman suffer harm, especially if her husband did not deserve it either. "Yeah, I could see the wedding ring from here." I addressed her directly in an unarguable tone. "Sweetheart, you should find somewhere else to be, such as at home with your husband. You know, the one you promised to leave all others for?" I wasn't sure what she did next, but after surveying the situation, she chose to follow my advice and disappeared back into the club, despite Desmond and Richard's protestations. After she left, the men became irritated with me, asking why I had interfered with their plans. I gently reminded them that the woman belonged to her husband. One of the men recognized me, recalling our previous encounter about 10 months prior. He recognized me as the husband of the woman who had asked him to hold back so she could join them. They inquired about her whereabouts, expressing an interest in meeting again. I told them she had moved on since then. When they asked if we'd split up, I responded that I had lost interest in her after she left with them. As they approached me, they asked if I was looking for revenge. Their intentions became clear. They seemed to be completely focused on me, unaware that my friends were closing in behind them. Suddenly, they were restrained by 3 of my friends. Despite their struggles, Hines and Rick were strong enough to overcome them, and they were soon kneeling with their arms bound behind their backs. Their confidence quickly faded. One of them attempted to justify their actions, claiming that they had simply made an offer, which the woman had willingly accepted. I responded that while I was initially angry with her, my concern had shifted to them and others like them who posed a threat to society. I was determined that they would never repeat such behavior. I told my friends to load them into Jed's pickup truck, where they were secured in case the 2 people tried to flee. We arrived at a secluded area in the county about an hour later, accompanied by Jed, whose family owned a nearby farm. We arrived at a large grove of trees, miles from civilization and completely hidden from view. The guys dragged our captives out of the truck with little care. I enjoyed the fear in their eyes. They probably never imagined that their casual lovemaking would put them in this situation. They, like Christy, were facing unforeseen consequences. So, in a lighthearted tone that hopefully disguised my seriousness, I discussed the best way to rid society of its carnivorous behavior. I expressed my thoughts on how to deal with them, including the possibility of castration followed by release, which horrified them. I mentioned the potential complications if they sought medical attention following such an act. They all agreed on this point, but my friends Desmond and Richard remained silent. I then mentioned the alternative option of killing them both in order to eliminate any witnesses. While Desmond appeared horrified, Richard's expression suggested that he would prefer to die than live without his manhood. I commented on the absurdity of measuring one's self-worth by the size of their gonads. Desmond attempted to justify their actions, claiming that they were simply making love and that the woman had previously been with other men. I rejected him. I stated that my concern was no longer with her, but with them. I expressed my dissatisfaction with men like them who believed they could seduce married women without consequences. I believed it was time for them to learn a lesson and set an example for others. I motioned for the rest of the gang to join me in a private huddle nearby. The goal was simple: intimidate the creeps. Truthfully, I'm not a violent person, and while I wanted to hurt these guys, it wasn't my true intention. At least not permanently. We kept them on edge for about an hour, convincing them that we had reconsidered taking their lives or maiming them. When we returned, their fight appeared to have drained away. I informed them that my friends had persuaded me not to take their lives or castrate them. Instead, I explained the consequences. They would take a severe beating. I stated unequivocally that we would provide each other with alibis, but warned them that if any police inquiries were made, they would face the initial options. I emphasized that we would closely monitor them, as we had their addresses and workplaces from their driver's licenses. I issued a stern warning that if they targeted married women again, they would face serious consequences. Desmond asked if there was a way to avoid the beating. I responded with a proposition. I suggested that they avoid the punishment by performing a specific act. Desmond eagerly agreed to the proposal in the hopes of avoiding the beating, which they did receive. With 10 of us, we vented our frustrations on them. We tried to avoid anything fatal, but there were a few broken bones. We avoided breaking ribs because they could puncture the lungs. At the very least, they will recall this for a long time. We drove them back to town and dropped them off on the curb near a hospital, avoiding the parking lot and any security cameras. The next morning, we made headlines as 2 victims of an assault by unidentified assailants, possibly during a failed robbery. The cases went cold when the men claimed they didn't recognize their attackers and thought it was a random incident. And now, a year has passed since that dreadful night. Somehow, I avoided becoming completely distrustful of all women. But it has not been easy. Christy is said to have recently met someone and begun dating. It's early days, but the results appear to be promising. Desmond and Richard appear to have vanished. At least they are no longer employed at the warehouse, and their apartments are vacant. I believe they are operating their scheme in another city. Sometimes I wonder if I should have dealt with those 2 creeps permanently. It crosses my mind frequently, and I sometimes regret my decision. I eventually had to find another hangout spot. Tasha became more assertive, and my polite refusals failed to deter her, so I was forced to tell her that nothing would happen between us because she saw nothing wrong with a wife cheating on her husband. She tried to persuade me that she wouldn't do it herself, but I simply didn't believe her. I'd rather have 2 dogs than date her. I haven't made any plans yet, but I'll eventually resume dating. Thank you for sharing your story. Here is the next story. When I got home from work on Wednesday evening, Linda, my wife of a decade, was waiting for me. She motioned for me to sit at the table, signaling the beginning of what I expected to be a series of unpleasant conversations based on what I had read. She took a deep breath, expressed her love for me, and assured me of her commitment to our marriage. But her next words took me off guard. She wished to take a lover. I braced myself, unable to understand her desire to pursue someone else despite claiming to love and cherish our relationship. So let me get this straight, I said. You claim to love me and want to protect our relationship. You're proposing to be intimate with someone else. That's putting it rather bluntly, she said. I've met someone I'd like to have a physical relationship with. It would only happen on occasion, and I promise to be open about it. If you truly love me as you claim, you'll give me this freedom because I believe it won't hurt my feelings for you. Her words stung, and I struggled to understand her reasoning. Linda, on the other hand, appeared unfazed, even smiling as she went on. She questioned my hypothetical reaction if the roles were reversed, but I knew she wouldn't take such a suggestion well. Despite my reservations, I tentatively agreed to consider her proposal, with the caveat that it would not jeopardize our relationship. She exclaimed, "Bull crap! You would have flipped out if I'd mentioned it." I scoffed, taking her off guard. She appeared surprised, saying, "I didn't expect you to react like this. I assumed your love for me would enable me to pursue something so important to me. What you're smoking must be illegal. Did you think I just said you could go sleep with this guy instead? Do you expect me to sit at home while you spend the weekend with him? Maybe I didn't think things through properly." "What do you think?" I replied. "Yeah, I didn't really think about everything, including your feelings. If I say no, will you still go through with it?" she inquired uncertainly. "I do not know. I didn't expect you to refuse. I did not think this through." "Very well," she admitted. "Tell me what. Give me a few days to think it over. Let's meet Sunday afternoon after I've had some time to think. You totally caught me off guard tonight." I went to our bedroom and began moving my belongings to the guest room. "What are you doing now?" she asked. "I'd rather not share a bed with someone who is preoccupied with someone other than me." I responded by slamming the door once I was in the guest room. Sleep was elusive, but I devised a plan. I also concluded that if she followed through, we were done. The next day, I left for work at my usual time without speaking with Linda. I called my workplace and asked for 2 days off for personal reasons. Then I went out and bought 3 voice-activated recorders. I strategically placed them, one near the phone, one in the bedroom, and one in her car. In addition, I acquired a phone tape recorder and installed it on our phones. My next stop was the cell phone company with my name on her account. Obtaining a copy of her phone charges was simple while she was still at work. I looked into her email accounts. I stumbled upon one I was not aware of, but the password was simple. There, I found a wealth of information. Fortunately, knowing that she hadn't been intimate with him yet, I set it up to discreetly forward any emails from that account to me. My plans for the day also included obtaining a pair of GPS locators that are small and easy to conceal. I planned to put one in her wallet, assuming she kept her cash and cards, and the other in her car. It was a busy day, but everything lined up for me to keep an eye on her. The only thing missing was her cell phone. I hoped to retrieve it in the evening, along with planting the GPS devices. Upon checking her emails, I discovered a correspondence between her and Frank Jones, a colleague whom I intended to retaliate against. The emails confirmed their plans for the upcoming weekend, rendering my objections futile. On Friday, I consulted a highly recommended divorce lawyer, instructing him to initiate proceedings, citing adultery with Frank Jones as the co-defendant. My lawyer assured me that with sufficient evidence, suing him would be straightforward. Armed with email exchanges, phone records, and soon-to-be audio recordings, he commenced the legal process promptly. When Linda returned home that evening, I remained silent and distant. As she prepared dinner, I left for a bar to eat and have a few drinks. Upon my return, she attempted to engage me in conversation, but I brushed faster, retreating to the guest room and slamming the door shut. The only chance she had to salvage our marriage was to cancel her plans with Frank, but I doubted that would happen. I gave her the cold shoulder for the remainder of the weekend until Sunday afternoon. I informed her it was time to talk, and we settled in the seats in the kitchen. I took the lead, expressing my profound dissatisfaction with her request. After much contemplation, I couldn't find any way to reconcile myself with it. Despite her assurances that it wouldn't affect our marriage, it's already taken a significant toll. She seemed visibly angered by my stance, suggesting that if I considered her perspective, I might be more understanding. I attempted to see things from her viewpoint, but I couldn't foresee any positive outcomes. Therefore, my answer had to be no. "How can you be so selfish if you love me?" she retorted. "I'm not the selfish one pursuing a sexual encounter with someone else. Seems to be the epitome of selfishness to me," I replied. "What if I go ahead with it anyway?" she pressed. "There will be serious repercussions for any infidelity. We both made vows of exclusivity 10 years ago," I reminded her. "I know, but this is something I feel compelled to do," she insisted. "Then I suppose our discussion is concluded." "You need to seriously reconsider your actions," I declared, rising from my seat and exiting the house. I took my laptop to a Wi-Fi spot and began monitoring their email exchanges. She was furious, but determined to proceed regardless. He revealed he had reserved room 125 at the Hilton in Kansas City for Friday and Saturday nights. Swiftly, I booked the same room for Thursday night. Their plan seemed too convenient. They were also arranging a romantic date for Saturday evening dinner, dancing, and presumably intimacy. She even mentioned buying new lingerie for the occasion as they moved past my rejection and continued planning their weekend. I observed, noting their check-in time of 3 o'clock. He planned to pick her up at 1 o'clock for the 2-hour drive, aiming to arrive as early as possible. I was taken aback to learn that he planned to pick her up at our house. I needed to decide what my next move would be. I also booked a room for the weekend, strategically close to theirs to intercept all communication signals. Over the next few days, I gathered all the necessary equipment. I acquired a couple of compact, high-definition fiber optic video cameras, intending to install them in the room on Thursday, ensuring I'd be prepared to capture their weekend activities. This evidence would serve as potent ammunition for my divorce case. Throughout this time, I completely ignored her. But Wednesday marked the final reckoning for her. I decided to give her one last opportunity if she chose Frank. Our marriage was over. I asked her to join me at the table for a conversation. Despite her apparent reluctance, she obliged. I urged her once more to reconsider, emphasizing the damage her decision would inflict on our marriage. Disregarding my plea, she affirmed her intention to proceed with Frank with a heavy heart. I realized she had chosen him over our relationship. I stood up and left the room, slamming the door behind me as usual. My marriage was now irretrievably broken, and someone would pay for it. Thursday morning, I went to work and arranged to have the afternoon and the following day off, explaining to my boss that I was finalizing plans to divorce Linda. He expressed his support and granted me the time I needed. That afternoon, I drove to Kansas City, checked into their room, and installed all the surveillance devices, meticulously ensuring they were operational. I wanted to gather irrefutable evidence for the divorce before confronting them. Upon returning home, I contemplated the demise of my marriage, realizing I had one more task to complete. I stopped at a store and purchased a small can of pepper spray, intending to disrupt their romantic date. When I arrived home, Linda was standing in the kitchen. She looked at me expectantly, but I walked past her in silence, slamming my door once again. Linda entered my room, attempting to be amicable. I rebuffed her, instructing her to preserve her friendliness for Frank because I didn't need pity. Ignoring her, I turned away, prompting her to leave. Despite fitful sleep that night, I ensured everything was in place to end this situation. Friday morning, I rose at the usual time and left without uttering a word to her at the lawyer's office. I signed the necessary papers informing him that I'd have all the evidence by Monday and requesting that she be served at work that afternoon. I also asked that papers be served to Frank simultaneously, as I was suing him for alienation of affection. Checking Linda's GPS, it indicated she was at the hair salon. Upon returning home, I searched her suitcase and discovered her new, alluring underwear. Regrettably, it wasn't for me. Wearing rubber gloves, I retrieved the pepper spray and discreetly sprayed her underwear and bra cups before returning them to the suitcase. It was time for some fun. Next, I went to the bank and closed all our joint accounts, transferring the funds to a new account. I then canceled all the credit cards with both our names on them. After a satisfyingly thorough warning, I returned home to bid farewell to my wife. It was 12:30, and I knew she'd be preparing for a rendezvous with her new beau. Upon entering the house, Linda was nowhere to be seen, so I assumed she was upstairs getting ready with resolve. I ascended to her room and entered. She stood there, clad in a set of sexy underwear I had once gifted her as she moved to cover herself. I stopped her, noting I had seen it before with a new hairdo, flawless makeup, and lingerie. She looked stunning. I couldn't resist speaking my mind. "You look amazing. It's a shame you don't put in this much effort for me," she responded. "It's not like that. I just want to make a good impression. You seem more concerned about what he thinks than you've ever been about me," I remarked. "I just wanted to feel sexy today," she explained. "While you certainly looked sexy, you know I loved you with all my heart," I countered. "We made vows to forsake all others. That meant something to me, but apparently not so much for you." Approaching her, I gently removed the rings from her left hand. "I gave you this ring on our wedding day. The engagement ring belonged to my mother, so I'll keep it for the same reason. But I won't tolerate you wearing these while you're with someone else." Stunned, she remained silent as I continued. "I won't be here when he arrives, but he can't come into my house. If you cross that line, there will be consequences. I'll be watching." "Why are you doing this?" she protested. "Because you've betrayed our love," I replied coldly. "I hope this weekend is worth it." With that, I turned and walked away from my soon-to-be ex-wife, ignoring her cries as I left parking down the street. I kept watch. I ensured I parked where Linda could spot me if he entered the house. I risked going to jail, but the impact on them would be far worse. Soon enough, his car pulled up. He approached the door, rang the bell, and Linda emerged with her suitcase, immediately wrapping her arms around his neck for a passionate kiss. As he picked up her suitcase, she shot me a smug grin, then sat beside him in the car, flashing another smug look as they drove past. I responded by flipping her off, causing her smug expression to vanish. Returning home, I changed all the locks and garage door code. After grabbing the suitcase I'd already packed, I headed to Kansas City, checked in, and set up my laptop in my room. The camera captured Linda unclothed in bed, indicating he'd already had his way with her, and it was evident he hadn't lasted long. Emerging from the bathroom, he too was unclothed, revealing his diminutive size, prompting laughter from me as he approached the bed ready for another round. Linda smiled and embraced him, but I couldn't help but chuckle as she reached for his small member. It was clear she wasn't accustomed to such a lackluster performance. Her frustration was apparent as he struggled to satisfy her, and it seemed she would return home dissatisfied, only to be kicked out the next day. He made several unsuccessful attempts while she remained unfulfilled, much to my amusement. Satisfied with the outcome, I left to grab dinner and a few drinks. Feeling vindicated, I said everything to record, gathering evidence for my lawyer and to underscore her poor choice in partners. Upon my return, he was asleep and she appeared even more frustrated. Despite the initial pain of losing my wife, this situation was becoming rather amusing. I went to bed envisioning the mischief I'd stir up the next day. Thoughts of attractive women at the bar reminded me of the freedom to pursue them, falling asleep with a contented smile. I felt relieved knowing my path was clear. Upon waking refreshed, I eagerly prepared for some enjoyment. After a pleasant shower, I headed out for a nice breakfast, grabbing snacks in case I couldn't get away. Later, returning to my room, I contacted the local florist, ordering a bouquet for Linda. It mirrored the ones I'd given her on our anniversaries, a poignant reminder of what she was risking. Though I hoped for good timing, it was inconsequential, the delivery aligning perfectly, as they returned and began to engage intimately. A knock interrupted. The florist delivered the flowers, and I observed a mix of contemplation and anger on Linda's face. She retrieved her cell phone and dialed. Soon enough, my phone was ringing. I answered, and we exchanged a brief conversation. "Hello? How are you doing?" she inquired. "Not worth a crap. My wife is out with some other guy while I stew in anger," I responded bitterly. "Why do you ask? It's not like you care." "Well, I just received a bouquet of flowers similar to what you usually get me for our anniversary. I wanted to know what you were up to," she explained. "I don't understand how you could think I did that. Firstly, you and your brilliant boyfriend kept me in the dark about your whereabouts. Secondly, if I had sent you flowers, they wouldn't have been pleasant. The card would have been scathing." Addressing my cheating wife, I retorted, "And you, little Frankies? Maybe they'll give you a glimpse of what you're sacrificing." I noticed her stunned expression as I turned off my phone. She attempted to call again, but of course there was no answer. After a few more attempts, she gave up. She informed him of my words, and he reassured her that I'd come around. However, I knew I wouldn't until I read myself off her. Though she initially resisted his advances, she eventually relented. I seized the opportunity to order Linda's favorite pizza for delivery. The pizza arrived just as he was mounting her again. He grew irate and refused to pay, but the delivery person confirmed the room number and his cell phone number. Threatened with police involvement, Frank reluctantly paid up. They opted to have a meal since they had already paid for it. After enjoying their lunch, they conversed for a while. However, Frankie quickly resumed his advances, as things heated up between them. I phoned the sandwich shop and ordered her favorite sandwich for delivery. He had been engaged in intercourse with her for about a minute when the sandwich arrived. Upon seeing it, Linda speculated that I must have discovered their location. He was incredulous, but she recounted my suspicions about her new partner crack-on, suggesting that I might have hacked into her email. She praised my intelligence, though he seemed unconvinced. Despite this minor hiccup, they decided to get dressed and go out for a while, planning to clean up upon their return and prepare for their romantic date. She assured him she would make it up to him later as they departed. I couldn't help but laugh hysterically. Tears streamed down my face as I anticipated the unfolding events upon their return. Linda hurriedly stripped and dashed into the shower. She spent a considerable time there, emerging with her chest and groin area bright red and evidently painful. It appeared that little Frankie wouldn't be getting any action that night, as Linda lay on the bed groaning in discomfort. Frankie attempted to touch her, only to be met with her angry outburst, citing her pain and lack of interest. She attributed her discomfort to a possible allergic reaction to her new lingerie. Unaware of my involvement, I spent the remainder of the day organizing my videos and preparing DVDs for my lawyer and Frankie's wife. Satisfied with my accomplishments, I retired to bed, a content smile on my face. It seemed that trouble had found its way into paradise, and I was the orchestrator of it. Sunday morning, I rose and headed home, knowing Linda would face even more turmoil upon her return. Tomorrow, it would all come to an end. When Frankie dropped her off later that day, he didn't even escort her to the door. He simply let her out. I sat on the couch engrossed in a football game and didn't acknowledge her arrival. She announced she was home, but I remained indifferent. Walking between me and the TV, she offered a seductive smile, saying she thought I'd be happy to see her. "You're not dead," I retorted. "What would give you that idea? Do I look like I'd become dim-witted over the last few days?" She responded defensively. "I know you did, but I didn't. I never thought you were foolish," I countered. "And did you really think you loved me enough to move past this? Well, I loved you with all my heart. But that was in the past. You broke my heart when you chose him. Despite my pleas, I lamented. I told you how I felt, and it meant nothing to you. So as far as I'm concerned, once you left with him, I didn't really care if you came back or not. I can't believe you feel that way about me," she protested. "Believe it because you made a colossal mistake," I asserted. "I don't know if there's any chance for us going forward. I'll do anything to make it up to you. I realize now that I made a huge mistake. Is there anything I can do?" she implored. "You can get on your knees and eat my crap," I snapped. "But you know I can't do that," she responded. "I know you won't do that. So I guess that tells me how much your promise to do anything to save our marriage is worth." I concluded, "It's worth about as much as your promise to be faithful when we got married. I was thinking about you all the way home today. I really want to make love to you tonight." "I need you," she pleaded. "You need me? I don't think so. And as far as making love tonight, there's not much chance," I replied sternly. "Did you have little Frankie? Use a rubber every time he had closeness with you?" "No, he's married and I can't have children," she explained. "Do you think you're the only one he's used this excuse with? You're now damaged goods as far as I'm concerned. There's no way I would sleep with you until you have a clean bill of health from a doctor. Also, I don't do seconds," I declared. "I know he's clean, but you could use a rubber if you don't think so," she suggested. "Right. I'm going to use a rubber to sleep with my wife after she slept with some loser bareback all weekend." "Screw you. You chose little Frankie over me," I retorted. "I'm going out for a while. I really can't stand looking at your cheating self anymore tonight. You can sleep in the guest room. I prefer the master bedroom. And unlike you, I didn't do anything wrong." "Can we talk about this?" she pleaded. "We can talk tomorrow after you get back from work." "I really don't know what else there is to discuss," I replied, ending the conversation. I left the house and headed to a nearby bar and grill to grab some dinner and clear my mind. Well, my mind was already clear as I knew exactly what I was doing. I just wanted to get away from her. Since I'm not much of a drinker, I simply ate my meal and then went for a long walk. Upon returning home, I found her in my bed. I glared at her and demanded she get out of my bed. "This is our bed. I've just as much right to be here as you do," she protested. "The hell you do. You gave up that right when you slept with little Frankie. So you either get out of my bed, or I'll drag your sorry butt out of here and toss you in the street," I asserted. She started crying and slowly left the room. I closed and locked the door behind her, still hearing her sobs as she walked down the hallway. The next morning, I completely ignored her. We each had breakfast and she left at her usual time before leaving. She turned and told me she loved me. I shot her a scornful look and emphasized that I had loved her too, making sure to use the past tense. Tears began to swell up as she turned and walked away. Once she was gone, I began packing her things in garbage bags as I packed. I called Frankie's wife, Linda. I asked if she knew her husband had spent the weekend with my wife. She thought he had been away on business, so when I offered her copies of my evidence, she eagerly agreed. I was stunned when she opened the door. She was absolutely stunning. I was speechless and had to apologize, explaining that I was taken aback by her beauty, which was indeed true. We got down to business and I explained what had happened over the weekend. She was furious and we decided she would accompany me to the lawyer's office to see if he would take her case. He did, and even offered us a discount. While Linda filled out the paperwork, I spoke with the lawyer. I asked if I needed to wait to serve Frankie to protect Linda. He assured me that as long as she signed the papers beforehand, she would be okay. Linda and I went out for lunch while they prepared her papers. After she signed, I took her home and then went home myself to await Linda's call. I was supposed to call Linda that night to update her on how things went. Around 3 o'clock, my phone rang. She was not pleased. "What the hell is this?" she demanded. "What do you mean?" I replied innocently. "I just got served with divorce papers and Frank received papers for a lawsuit." She exclaimed. "It seems pretty straightforward to me. I warned you there would be consequences for your weekend." "Apparently you didn't take me seriously," I replied. "I didn't think you would go through with this," she protested. "Maybe you should have listened to me instead of listening to the nonsense that little Frankie was feeding you." "I don't want to discuss this over the phone. We'll talk when you come back to my house," I replied before hanging up. I then took the garbage bags containing her belongings and threw them into the front yard, preparing for her return. As she pulled into the driveway, she erupted in anger. I recorded the confrontation, intending to use it as evidence for a restraining order to keep her away from me. Despite her screaming and spitting, I remained calm and composed as she vented her frustration. I finally gave in and initiated our last conversation. "If you're willing to talk, you need to calm down so we can have a discussion. Otherwise, I'll pack your things in your car and you can leave. I never imagined you'd do this to me. Do this to you, you foolish woman. You did this to me and to our relationship. I warned you repeatedly not to do this, even begged you not to ruin our marriage, but you chose to destroy it. So why would you think I wouldn't file for divorce? You claimed you loved me. I did. I loved you more than anything. And in return, you shattered my heart. The evident issue is that you didn't love or respect me. I can't stay with someone who thinks so little of me, but I still have feelings for you. Nonsense. If you truly loved me, you wouldn't have slept with little Frankie this weekend. Why do you keep calling him little Frankie? Because I had video cameras in your room and recorded the whole weekend. It's obvious why I call him little, the moment I saw his pitiful size. I laughed until I cried. I questioned if you could even feel him inside you. I noticed you weren't climaxing like you do when we're intimate. We don't just have sex, we make love. That's the significant difference. I agree, what we had was genuine love. You're probably going to miss that. Look at it positively. Now you're free to be with anyone you desire. You could have a different partner every night. I don't want that. I want you. And only you. Let's go inside and talk for a bit. I apologize for being harsh, but I'm filled with anger right now. However, I know that I would never physically harm you. The same cannot be said for little Frankie. We entered and settled at the kitchen table, a familiar spot for us. It hit me hard, realizing this would be our final gathering here. We sat together as she initiated the conversation. This time, I urged myself to stay composed and avoid speaking harshly. "You wouldn't actually harm Frank, would you?" Linda began, her voice tinged with concern. "Why not? He shattered my once blissful marriage. I believe he should face consequences beyond my lawsuit and his divorce," I responded, my tone firm. "He's not getting a divorce. His wife agreed to our arrangement and allowed him to proceed," Linda countered, hoping to present a different perspective. "That's just a tactic to vilify me and win her over," I argued, skeptical of their motives. "I spoke to his wife this morning and shared my evidence. Now we share a lawyer who even gave us a discount," Linda informed me, revealing her proactive steps. "I wish you had been truthful. When I asked how you'd react if I wanted to be with another woman I accused feeling betrayed, you would have reacted strongly, just as his wife did. I don't believe you." Linda defended herself, doubting my hypothetical tolerance. "And that's precisely why we're divorcing. I no longer care about your beliefs. When you call him later, you'll find he's also been ousted," I declared, sealing the fate of our marriage. "So you're really kicking me out?" Linda asked, seeking clarification on her immediate future. "Since the night you revealed your plan, I've been contemplating in the guest room. Within an hour, I decided on divorce." I explained, detailing my decision-making process. "Why didn't you inform me beforehand?" Linda inquired, puzzled by my silence. "I doubted you'd stop. It would have only angered you. Despite explaining my feelings several times, the choice had to be yours," I reasoned, highlighting the importance of personal choice. "I saw in your emails that my words meant nothing to you." Confirming my decision, Linda shared, revealing the final straw in her decision. "I signed the papers the following Friday while you prepared for your date. I can't believe I was that naive," I confessed, reflecting on my delayed realization. "Is there any chance for forgiveness?" Linda asked, her voice softening. Linda, I once loved you enough to consider it, but last night was your final chance and you squandered it. While I might forgive, I can never trust you again. Living with that uncertainty isn't an option. It's best we end it now, I concluded, closing the chapter on our relationship. She burst into tears, but I remained resolute. Unlike you, I've pondered this extensively and always arrive at the same conclusion. I'm divorcing you and I'll make sure little Frankie pays for what he did to our marriage. I declared firmly before you leave. You can contact him and arrange a place to stay. But don't attempt to use your credit cards. They've all been canceled. I left half the funds in our checking account for you, but I removed my name from it. I'll split our savings with you. You can keep your car, but you're responsible for the payments. All your belongings and clothes are yours to keep, and once you find a place, take as much furniture as you need. However, the house is mine. If I sell it, I'll share the proceeds. It's all specified in the divorce papers. If you choose to contest it, I'll use all my evidence, even if it means destroying you. I hope it doesn't come to that. But I'm prepared to do what's necessary. I continued, outlining the consequences of her actions. I won't fight it. This is all my fault. I just wish I could take it back. Linda responded, her voice filled with regret. You know the difference between a cheating wife and a light bulb, don't you? I asked, trying to inject a dark humor into the situation. No. What is it? Linda inquired, puzzled and still tearful. You can unscrew a light bulb? I answered, attempting to lighten the mood. She didn't find it amusing. I escorted her out of the house, packing her belongings into her car as she cried. Once it was loaded, I handed her one last item, her wedding ring flattened with a hammer. It's now scrap gold, I explained, symbolizing the end of our marriage. After closing her car door and kissing her forehead, I uttered my final words. Goodbye, my love. Walking back to my empty house. I didn't watch her drive away. Tears filled my eyes and I cried for another hour until I was emotionally spent. It was time to consider my options. Option 1, drown my sorrows in alcohol. But I disliked the idea. Option to end my life to please everyone. But I refused to grant her that satisfaction. Option 3, stand tall, knowing I was blameless and moved forward. The absence of Linda would be a vast improvement, bringing a smile to my face. Standing upright and still smiling, I called Linda. We made plans for dinner, signaling the beginning of my healing journey. We might become just friends, or perhaps I could find someone better. I contemplated aloud as the memory of her lingered in my mind.